All right, welcome to this quick video going over bottlenecks and asymmetric actions. I'll try to get this done in like 5 minutes. So bottlenecks are very important because they're essentially the biggest constraint within the system that you're trying to optimize. So the company itself, Better AMS, is a giant system. Everything's a system. We have solar systems, we have digestive systems, we have marketing systems, we have operative systems, finance systems, we have lots of different systems, language systems, etc. Now what's most important is that within every system there are certain bottlenecks that can limit it to achieving the desired goal that you want. So let's say that you have a goal of building the most people-centric company on earth, and that requires scaling quickly and balancing the ability to have the best results, the greatest efficiency or the utmost efficiency and the greatest experience. I forget the words that align with those. But if we're trying to end MRR growth, if we're trying to optimize for these four fronts, we kind of need to collectively identify our own strengths and choose a front, and then within that front try to identify the biggest bottleneck, because if we fix that bottleneck, that's going to be the thing that allows that front to make the most progress. For example, okay, let's look at this little diagram here. So we have inputs, processes, outputs, feedback, and then we have an environment which affects the overall system. This is just a system in general. The environment is like our niche. We're in right now just Amazon advertising, and we're also on planet Earth. If you want to go that big, that's like the biggest we could go in terms of our environment. And so we are limited to selling our service to people on this planet, and we're also limited primarily to selling people that to our service that speak our languages. So we don't speak Japanese, we don't speak Chinese, we don't speak these languages. Therefore, our current agency is limited by this environmental factor. It's kind of an environmental factor because it's tied to the people that we have within the company, and also just where we're growing the company. We're growing in the United States. So hopefully that helps understand environment. Environment is one that most people don't really understand, but it does have a very important effect on the overall system. And the most important variable is the goal. So let's just say that this year, which is the case, our goal is to get to $250,000 per month in monthly recurring revenue. We also have certain retention rate goals that are very important, but let's just focus on MRR because that's a very simple one. So we want to get to $250,000 a month in MRR. Well, that's our goal from a super high level at the current year-to-date target. What is the biggest bottleneck within our agency as a system? So we're always working on things. These are the inputs that we're always working on. This is just like right now I'm making a video that will hopefully help people kind of understand this concept, which will help everyone better understand what the best thing and most important thing is that they should work on is. So inputs go into the agency. The inputs is essentially all of the people within the company that spend their time and energy working within the company. And so those are all of our inputs. This is a very super high level basic system. The process is the agency, right? All those inputs, they're essentially the energy that gets spent, the campaigns that get launched, the headlines that get written, the new systems or services that we roll out, the new people we hire. All of these things go into the agency, so to speak. And within this giant system, we have subsystems, and the output of that is currently an MRR of around 115,000. Now, there's many other scenarios we could create. We could create scenarios based on our culture, like how happy the output could be based on how happy our people are and how engaged they are and how likely they are to stay. For now, I'm just choosing MRR because it's a very simple one. So our current agency system as a whole has a throughput of $115,000 per month. That's what it was last month. Great. Now, the question that you can ask yourself, especially when you're setting your OKRs, is, okay, which front do I have a high affinity for, number one? And what is the biggest bottleneck within that front? We start with number one because it's most important to figure out what is your strengths. We want you to work on your strengths, and we want to be a strength-based culture where people really try to focus on their strengths and they're sitting in the right seat on the bus, so to speak. So great. Let's say that you pick MRR growth as a front that you have the highest affinity for. Fantastic. Actually, let's just say the best experience. That's the front that you have the highest affinity for. Great. Well, what do you think is the biggest bottleneck within us being able to provide the best experience? It's likely, if you've read the collective purpose document, experience ties into two things: internal and external. External being the clients and how they perceive us and how they feel, and internal being our internal team, everyone that works at Better AMS, and how they feel working within Better AMS. So you can kind of decide if you want to go on internal or external. I mean, you could potentially do both, but I like to just focus on one thing. Let's say that you think the biggest bottleneck within experience is internally. For some reason, we have a very toxic culture, and you identify that toxic culture is coming from a lack of vision and mission, and a leader who is very self-seeking and is ultimately pulling out a lot of the cash flow for him or herself and doesn't necessarily care about the long-term growth of the company. They're just basically running this thing so that they can live a lavish lifestyle. I like this example because this was once an idea in my head of how I would like to run an agency, and it's a very common one that I see throughout many agency owners is this. So that's a toxic culture. You identify that. Well, that's the biggest bottleneck. Great. That's a very difficult bottleneck to address, but let's just say you identify that as the biggest bottleneck. Well, how can you fix that? That's where we go into step 2, which is asymmetric action. So once you've kind of identified the bottleneck, you figure out, what's my biggest strengths, what front aligns with my strengths, and what do I have the highest affinity for. Now that I'm looking at the best experience, what do I think is the biggest bottleneck within this front, and why? And then, okay, I've identified that maybe these are the top 3 ideas I have for the biggest bottlenecks within this particular front. And now I'm going to look at what is the asymmetric actions that I can take to be able to fix this bottleneck, okay, in the next quarter, let's just say, for my OKRs coming up. Well, this asymmetric action concept or mental model is very simple. It's just about what is the action you can take that will require the least amount of time and energy but provide us with the greatest results. So we're trying to find the low-hanging fruit, essentially. And the only reason why we wouldn't pick the lowest hanging fruit, it's not necessarily about the lowest hanging fruit, it's about finding the best apple on the tree that is within reach, so to speak, okay? So you wouldn't pick the apple at the top of the tree because it's way too hard, and maybe it's a rotten apple, so you're like, I would never pick that. That's not going to have any benefit. But there's an apple that's kind of like in the middle-ish, lower part of the tree, and it's extremely ripe, and you're thinking, okay, I can easily grab that, and this will provide exponential return. I don't know. That's how I like to see it. So you're trying to find the least input, greatest output, all right? So that is very much bottlenecks and asymmetric actions. Now, what you would end up doing is brainstorming this process yourself. Then you would hop on a call with the system owner of the OKRs, which currently, as I'm making this video, is me. And we would discuss and brainstorm together. Okay, hey, you think it's this. Give me the context. Why do you think it's that? What made you think that we have a toxic culture with a leader who's very self-seeking and that this is holding us back from achieving our goal? Give me your logic. Let's talk about that. And then maybe I'll pitch in and say, okay, here's what I think the biggest bottleneck is. Let me give you my logic. Let's brainstorm which one is probably the biggest bottleneck and why. And then once we've identified, okay, we think this is the biggest bottleneck, what's the best asymmetric action? Sometimes you may have 2 bottlenecks, A and B. Bottleneck A might be 20% bigger than bottleneck B, but because it's exponentially harder to solve than bottleneck B, and bottleneck B is a very easy fix. You can do something in like 3 days that would fix it. That is to be considered as well, because that means it's just got extremely low-hanging fruit, easy thing to do. We should do it right away, and then we can look at going after the biggest and most hardest bottleneck, so to speak. So it's this constant fine balance between what is the biggest bottleneck and what is the best asymmetric action. Okay, and you're kind of mapping out all the bottlenecks, all the asymmetric actions within the bottlenecks, and finding the best pathway that will lead you to the goal, right? Because at the top of your mind is always the goal. What is the goal? Okay, the goal is this. And so with the goal in mind, what is the bottleneck within this front? That's it. So another way you can look at it is if you come down here in the bottom left corner, this is kind of a different way to look at the bottleneck system, which is much easier. This is your classic system, which took a long time for me to kind of wrap my head around and grasp it, but this is much easier. So within this planet, or whatever you want to dimension, Earth, reality, there's infinite potential. I mean, you can do pretty much anything with enough time and energy and resources and health, and basically we have infinite potential in this reality. All right, now this infinite potential goes into a system, and this is the basic system. We can call this a pipeline instead of a system. Now let's build an agency pipeline / agency system. At the beginning of the agency, we have, let's just say, marketing, which is attracting potential prospects, then sales, which is closing those prospects into clients, and then operations, which is servicing those clients, and then we have, let's just say, culture. Now, the order here is kind of important, but you could put culture at the beginning, you could put culture at the end, or in the middle. Sometimes the order is important, sometimes it's not. What's important to know is that in the beginning we have infinite potential, but with each subsystem, so this whole thing is a system, and then we have subsystems here. Marketing, this is a subsystem. This is the pipe, right? So the pipe of marketing, you can see it's very wide, and it can hold and take a lot of potential. This means that this part of the pipeline is very well built. Okay, it can handle a lot of scale, meaning we can attract a lot of ideal prospects, we can track a lot of great leads, and that's fantastic. Okay, so it has a high throughput, this system. Throughput's another word that should be understood, that it basically just means the efficiency of the system. So if a system, our agency, produces $115,000 per month, that's the throughput of the system if we're measuring the dollars earned on a monthly basis. Now the sales is another subsystem of this overall system, the pipeline, and this one has a terrible throughput. This is a terrible system. This would essentially mean that we suck at closing deals and we suck at sales. We suck at explaining to prospects why our service is worth $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 per month, and we just suck at that process. So we end up signing very little clients, which is painful, and this limits the potential growth of this system tremendously. You can see, because once a pipeline like this is like a physical pipeline that we're imagining here. There's only a certain amount of water that can go through this pipeline. There's only a certain amount of clients that can be signed with this system, so to speak, right? There can't be more than, let's just say, 2 clients a month that can be signed, because our sales process is so bad. And so this constraint holds back the everything after, right? Everything after this is held back tremendously. You can see the operations is actually very well done. It can hold a tremendous amount of scale. But right now, only really, let's just say, 15% of this system's capacity is being hit because of sales, right? We can't sign enough clients to even reach what our full capacity is. And so that's a huge problem, again, and this is because of the sales bottleneck, right? Now here's the final bottleneck in this system, which was what I used for the example, which is culture. Culture is the worst subsystem of the overall system. You can see it's barely getting any water through it. Now, culture tremendously affects the system of an agency, although many people don't realize it. But culture has a huge impact in the sense that if you have a toxic culture, you're not going to retain people very long. And just in general, no one's going to be really that happy, including you as the founder, if you are the founder. And so it's going to end up really never scaling just because of how everyone's leaving. Everyone keeps churning. No one stays longer than like 3, 6, 9 months. And so that sucks. And in general, you'll probably not want to work in the company very long because of how hard it is to scale. And it's like always you're fighting this uphill battle. And so you're pretty much never able to scale your agency. Even if you increased this sales pipeline drastically to like this kind of level, where in theory, if you did this, it would like, let's just say 5x your overall MRR. In the short term, it would do that, but in the long term, in the 9 to 12 months, you would still be very limited. It would still go back down to the original MRR, or it would be constantly fluctuating, very, very, going through these very like highs and lows because of how bad the culture is and how you can't retain people. So the end here is kind of the end result, right? This is just, let's say, your reservoir of water. If you consider the water MRR, then this is a low MRR agency. Let's just say it's like $20,000 per month because the culture is not good. The sales isn't good. Predominantly, the biggest bottleneck in this system is the culture, if we get rid of this stuff that I put here. And once we fix culture, we'll be able to have more water come through this system, and we'll be able to increase the MRR. What's important to also understand here is that fixing it doesn't mean it happens immediately. There's a delay on the feedback. We can see that this is the overall system that we look at. And sometimes the actions that you make, like creating a vision, mission, and core values, and trying to assemble a leadership team that is very mature and thinks long term, like the output or the feedback that you'll receive from that is probably like 1 to 5 years down the road. Most likely the biggest impact of that decision to assemble a leadership team, put in place a very good vision and mission that the entire team resonates with, and constantly work at reinforcing core values and making a great culture. Those inputs are really not going to be tremendously felt or the result of that is not going to be seen until like 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. You will see something in the short term, but it's mainly a very long-term output, so to speak. So the feedback on something like improving the throughput of your culture is, let's just say, 1 to 5 years, okay? Now, this is a good thing. Some people might look at this and think, this is a bad thing. Why would I work on something that I won't see any results for 1 to 5 years? Well, actually, the further out you work, the better, because this is kind of like I forget what the word is, but it's kind of like, how long does your action, let me see how I can try to frame this. What's the horizon, the time horizon of your actions? So if you send a client an email, the second-order consequences, the positive second-order consequences of that are like less than 20 seconds. If you publish a video on YouTube, that video might generate tens of thousands of views every month for 5 years. So the horizon effect of that action is very positive. It just keeps bringing you a return on that initial energy that you made to make the video. Whereas a post on Facebook or a post on LinkedIn, it's like 24-hour half-life. That's the term I was looking for, half-life. So when you take an Advil, this is a term in the pharmaceutical world where if you take an Advil, half of the effect of the Advil or the life of the Advil is gone within, let's just say, 12 hours. So the half-life of an Advil is 12 hours. And the half-life of working on your culture is 5-10 years, right? Like potentially more. It's something you have to constantly work at, but what I'm getting at here is the effects are very long-term. And it's good to work on these long-term things, especially when your agency is over like $100,000 per month, and if you have time to work on those things, and you can kind of get away from the in the business and be more on the business, that it also becomes more important that if you're working more on the business, you work on things that are gonna have positive effects for the overall system for years to come. Okay, so that's kind of sidetracked there, but very important. And so the pipeline analogy is pretty simple and easy to understand. Let's say that you pick the front of culture, you want to improve that. Well, what experience, and internal experience specifically, that means like overall team happiness and engagement internally. How do you measure that? How do you improve it? What's the biggest bottleneck within that process or that system of experience? And then what's the asymmetric actions you can take to fix that bottleneck? So this is a high level overview of these two things. They're very important, and it should be pretty clear. I think I did a decent job of explaining it, hopefully. All right, guys, much love. I appreciate you watching this video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I might just publish this on YouTube, even though this is supposed to be an internal private thing that is going into our Notion here. But much love. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you in the next video. Ciao.